Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode is going to be really helpful if you have a teenager who is struggling with confidence. Honestly, I don't know any teenagers who don't struggle with confidence. I know being a teenager myself, confidence was at an all-time low, especially in those middle school, early high school years. So in this episode, what I'm going to be doing is explaining to you the five of the reasons why teenagers often struggle with confidence, and then also give you some really good tips on how to help your teenager feel more confident in their life. So we're going to be talking a little bit about social media influence. I know that's a big one. We're also going to be just talking about what it is that your teenager may be doing to self-sabotage and actually decrease their level of confidence without even realizing it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. On to number one, which is they're in the process of figuring out who they are. They're in identifying their identity. I'm gonna coin that. That's going to be my new phrase. I'm identifying my identity. They're figuring out who they are, what they want, who they want to align themselves with. And part of the process of figuring out who you are is trying new things. And when that happens, it could lead to failure. In fact, it likely will. They're going to be experimenting. They're going to try things that may not be suited for them. And like I said, that's going to lead to failure sometimes, real or perceived. Or they may wind up aligning with a crowd of people who make them feel inadequate or like they aren't as important or as good. I know that when I was in high school, I tried out for the volleyball team. I didn't know what I wanted to do in high school. I didn't know who I wanted to be in high school. I was still trying to figure out who I was in the social scene. So I tried out for volleyball. I didn't make it. So that was a failure, but I didn't make that mean that I was a failure. And I think the reason why it didn't really get to me too much is because I didn't really love running sprints. I didn't even know what sprints were until I tried out for volleyball. And I was like, oh, that was really hard. And I'm not really very good at it. So I was actually okay with not making the volleyball team. But that happens a lot in high school. They'll try out for things or they will try different arenas or social groups and feel like, oh gosh, I don't belong here. Maybe I don't belong anywhere. And it could really lead to that. So when those failures happen, what's important for them to do is to recognize that that failure, quote unquote, is just information. And they get to decide what they want to do with it. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong with them, but if they internalize the idea that there's something wrong with them, it could lead them to resist trying something else. So they won't fail again. So for me, that meant volleyball wasn't my sport. I could have made it mean that no sport is my sport, or I don't belong anywhere, or I could have internalized like that hurt. Of course, when I didn't make the team, I was disappointed and I was sad. I could have internalized that and thought, you know what, I don't want to feel that again. So I'm just not going to try out for anything else. I'm going to resist putting myself out there because I don't want to feel that disappointment again. And that's something that can happen really often with teenagers. So when this happens, if it were to continue, what happens is there's this thought, I'm not good enough, or I failed, or I don't measure up. And then if that thought keeps coming up over time, I'm not good enough, I don't measure up, then they behave in response to that. I don't measure up, I'm not going to try. Oh, I'm a failure because I don't belong. And then eventually that thought turns into a belief that they have about themselves. And then over time, if they keep believing that, it turns into their identity. So it's like there's this path that they can take. I'm trying on new things. I failed. If I continue to think I'm a failure, then eventually I will take on the identity of being someone who fails. Whereas I try something new, I fail, I take it as information. Like I mentioned before, what do I want to do with that information? Do I want to take the information and learn that I would like to practice more of this thing and get better at it? Or I don't want to take information from that and decide, okay, maybe that's not for me, but I did like this part of it. Let me find something else that aligns with that part of it. taking it and deciding on purpose what to do with it. Another thing that can happen, like I mentioned before, is that they align themselves with either a person or a group of people that makes them feel like they don't belong or treats them badly.